Well, we got a ruling out of the Supreme Court that is really good for democracy. And because of how much we talk about devastating things for American democracy, I do want to update you when we get some good news. So I'll first show you this being reported on CNN, this Supreme Court ruling, and then we'll discuss the specifics.
She's been our point in coming through this very lengthy decision. I was scrolling through it myself. Jessica, what did the justices decide here, written by the Chief Justice?
Yeah, the big takeaway here is that the Supreme Court is rejecting this broad independent state legislature theory. This is a theory that was pushed by backers of President Trump in the 2020 election to overturn the 2020 election results. So the Supreme Court here rejecting that broad interpretation of this theory. So to take you back, this was a dispute involving election maps in North Carolina. The North Carolina State Supreme Court several years ago stepped in, rejecting the maps. And then challengers to that brought this all the way to the Supreme Court saying, look, per the Constitution, it's only the state legislature that really has say over all things elections, including the drawing of election and voting maps. The state court should have really no say. You know, there's a clause in the Constitution that says that state legislatures should prescribe the time, manner, and place of elections, and Trump backers in particular interpreted that to mean that partisan state lawmakers had final say over elections. But the Supreme Court today rejecting that broad theory. This is a 6-3 decision written by the Chief Justice John Roberts. The Supreme Court really wanted to weigh in on this before any future elections coming up in just about a year and a half because of the real chaos that adopting a theory like this, or even letting this theory linger and not having any final say by the Supreme Court, could potentially cause. There was some question as to whether the Supreme Court would actually issue a decision here, because after the Supreme Court heard this case, the North Carolina Supreme Court actually changed its makeup. It became majority Republican. They actually reheard this case.
So we'll stop that there. So the specific ruling in what it means for North Carolina is good, but the larger precedent that it's setting and what the message that it's bolstering is really important. So to kind of walk through this, it implicates a few different things. Let's start with, you might remember John Eastman, this wacky lawyer who advised Trump on the idea that Mike Pence could reject the election results when it was time to certify the election results that found Joe Biden to have won the 2020 election, and send the results. One of the elements of this was send it back to the states, you'll hear them say. And the idea was state legislatures with Republican majorities might then decide, hey, we're going to overrule the vote in our state and just say, no, actually, we're sending Trump electors. We're going to send people to vote for Trump in the Electoral College. And so they wanted Pence to reject the actual electoral count, say, send it back to the states, and then pressure state legislators to then rule in favor of Trump having won. And so the reason why that's a part of this, even though it's not directly what has to do with this case in North Carolina, is because it was based on what is referred to as you heard there, the independent, let's see if I can get this specific term now, I'm losing it, independent state legislature theory, which is to say everything related to elections, the state legislature has full and complete authority over, and the courts, in this case the North Carolina Supreme Court, can't come in and say, no, you're acting unconstitutionally. Because what happened in this particular case is a map that was made by a Republican majority in the North Carolina state legislature was deemed to not be constitutional by the North Carolina Supreme Court, and then it got challenged up to the United States Supreme Court saying, hey, our state court can't come in and interfere in what the state legislature, as John Eastman wants people to believe, is an independent state legislature, in something they have complete authority over. The Supreme Court is saying that's not factual. While it's true the state legislature has most authority and makes pretty much all decisions on the way elections are run and the specifics of that, laws related, courts can still get involved. And that applies to rejecting a very gerrymandered map in North Carolina. And zooming out, it's the Supreme Court saying nationwide, yes, state courts, other entities than just the legislature have say in the constitutionality of laws being passed in regard to elections and actions by the legislature in regard to elections. And that is huge because of what we'll read next and how that could affect the next election, how the Supreme Court made it harder to overturn the 2024 election. The Supreme Court's ruling on Tuesday in a major election case was bad news for John Eastman, the lawyer aligned with Donald Trump who pushed a novel legal theory in his bid to overturn the 2020 election. Tuesday's 6-3 ruling rejected a sweeping version of what has been dubbed the independent state legislature theory, which argues that state legislatures have almost unfettered powers to implement election law, free even of the normal legal review carried out by state courts. And then it goes on to explain what I just did about the actions of John Eastman and attempting to get Mike Pence to reject the election results. And then talks about more on this. And essentially what it notes is what I'm mentioning, which is good to see that if election maps, congressional maps, I should say, and the way that districts are drawn and all that in states is so blatantly disenfranchising people because of how gerrymandered, unfair it is. State courts, based on this, can get involved to call that unconstitutional based on different reasons. And also in other cases, if, for example, another attempted coup was tried, we could be saved from that by state courts. Horrifying to think about that. But let me give you an example. Let's say certain swing states go to Biden in this next election. Trump loses key swing states, as he did last time, and there's a Republican majority. So let's just take Georgia, for example. Let's say their state legislature has a Republican majority. Biden wins it. But then Trump encourages, and a bunch of Republicans who are loyal to him try to go along with this. Who knows if this would apply necessarily to Georgia, but any of these key swing states that could have a Republican majority. And they say, we're going to vote in the state legislature to reject the actual electoral count or the actual vote count in our state to send electors to contribute to the electoral count. And we're going to say, no, even though Biden won our state, technically, we're going to send electors to vote for Trump instead. A state court could get involved, assuming it's not also way too conservative, and say, that's not constitutional. You're rejecting the actual results in your state, and possibly prevent stealing of an election, an actual one, as much as they talk about the election being stolen when it wasn't. And so hopefully, as NBC News says, the Supreme Court made it harder to overturn the 2024 election. Hopefully that's the reality, and we just got to win for democracy. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to be a part of what makes this show possible, plus get access to the full video version of the show hours before all the clips are able to be uploaded to the YouTube channel, plus get the bonus show on the weekends, you can do so by going to lukebeasleyshow.com/membership. That's lukebeasleyshow.com/membership, and there's a link in the description.